Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
We're back in the book of Hosea, and we are only covering a whopping 3 verses. I've never felt more like Lester in my life by covering 3 verses. But we're in this awkward spot because we didn't cover these 3 verses last week, because by the time we did all the background stuff and the first 9 verses, I really didn't have time for these 3 verses. But if we did these 3 and then the rest of chapter 2, we'd be here all night. So, but it's good because last week, it was very technical. There are a lot of dates, because there always are when you do background info. We had a Hebrew lesson, and there was a lot of technical stuff. So, this is a little breather, little break. Nothing too complicated at all, I would say. Right, if you remember, we had Hosea, his little living sermon illustration with his family. He had 3 kids: Jezreel, No Mercy, and who could forget, Not My People. And like I said last week, you just know that his kids were bullied relentlessly growing up. But what's interesting is, starting in verse 10 and running into 11, you kind of see the reversal of what came before, and one of the things that we really hit on last week was, the same version of God's name that he used to establish the covenant, he used that same version of his name now to say, you are not my people, and I will not be your God, in verse 9. But then immediately in verse 10, we start to have the reversal of that. So it's almost like you're getting whiplash when you just read this. You read all of chapter 1 without taking a break like we did. But we're going to kind of walk through it. So let's just go ahead and read verse 10 and 11 of chapter 1, and then verse 1 of chapter 2. So starting in verse 10, "Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass, in the place where it was said to them, You are not my people, there it shall be said to them, You are sons of the living God. Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and appoint for themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Say to your brethren, my people, and to your sisters, mercy is shown." So, yeah, you have a series of promises here, and like I said, it's tonal whiplash. Is what we're getting from the previous verses. But the first thing that is sort of promised and sticks out is, it says, "The number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea." Your little fill in the blank thing is, this promise obviously calls us back to God's covenant with Abraham, right? A couple instances, really there's a lot of instances in Genesis you could point to, but I'll just point out 2. Genesis 12:2, very first chapter where we meet Abraham, God says, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you." Going on 3 chapters later, Genesis 15, verse 5, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." And then going on, it says, "So shall your offspring be." So, as numerous as the sand, as numerous as the stars, it's the same kind of language that was used with Abraham when God made a covenant with him. This is a quote, but it says, "These promises do not concern themselves with a divided nation. And considering the following verse, it would seem that Israelites is intended in this context to mean all of Israel, both north and south." So if you remember when we were in Zechariah, right, we sort of had tonal whiplash there too, because we had a whole lot of, I'm breaking the bonds of my covenant, and I'm breaking the bonds between the north and the south. And then also in that same book, you had a whole lot of but also, you will live in peace and dwell securely. And it's a lot of the same kind of, weird tonal shifts that we see in Hosea. But what we talked about was, right, the emphasis is not on a literal reunification or some sort of like literal, we're reestablishing, the united monarchy like there was in the time of David. That never happened, obviously. And, when Jesus Christ came, who, is sort of the fulfillment of all of this, he had no interest in rebuilding any sort of physical kingdom, right? My kingdom is not of this earth. And he certainly had no interest in becoming the physical monarch in the sense that, in the sense of David or Solomon or any of the other kings. And another thing that we pointed out is in the book of Zechariah was, right, a lot of the sort of promises, talk about that tonal whiplash. You go from doom and gloom to promises. A lot of those were geared specifically toward the remnant, right? The remnant would be spared, right? God wouldn't let every single northerner, southerner die, right? Even if their kingdom fell, even if they went into exile, even if they lost, their ethnic heritage, right, there was still hope for the remnant. And a lot of those covenantal promises also were still given to the remnant. And so the point is very similar here in Hosea. You do see a lot of these promises that are, calling us back to Abraham, and obviously, Abraham eventually, his children, they grew in number, they grew in terms of land that they were occupying, they grew in strength, militarily and politically. And a lot of the same language is sort of used here, but that's not really what the focus is. And we'll see that as we cover the rest of verse 10 and into verse 11. So, second sort of promise that sticks out is it says, it shall be said, sorry, let me back up. In the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there it shall be said to them, you are sons of the living God. And we had this phrase, not my people. We saw this last week. This was Hosea's third child, starting in verse 8. When she weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. And then God said, call his name Lo Ami, or not my people, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God. Right, but despite this phrase being used in verse 9, talking about, Israelites, ethnic Israelites, the phrase here, a lot of people have pointed out, it's seems to be in reference to not only ethnic Israelites, but also Gentiles as well. And I think that's your fill in the blank, maybe? No? Okay, never mind. Go. Save that for later. We know from the history, right? The history of North and South, right? Like we said, the North, they never recovered from Assyria, right? That's not to say that they were completely genocided. That's not to say that, like, no Northerners survived. But on the whole, right, the North, it never came back. This is a quote. It says, it's evident from the passage as a whole that the North will not be restored and numerically expanded apart from reunification with the South and the inclusion of other people as well who will share the same benefit, right? So you have the promise of, okay, you're going to be as numerous as the sands of the sea, but that's tied to people who are not God's people being called God's people. And that's also tied to verse 11, the children of Judah and the children of Israel being gathered together, right? So, even though the North never recovered, like we said, the promise was still fulfilled, right? The North and South weren't exactly reunited in a political sense, again, like a united monarchy, but many Northerners fled to the South, right? And we've talked about that before. And right, the growth of Judah that happened post Assyria, right, happened because of the people of the North. And we know, the covenant on a large scale, right, sort of done away with, right? I mean, God gave Israel up to her fate. Assyria, took Israel, conquered Israel. But like we said, there were still covenantal promises given to that faithful remnant, right? And like I said, we looked at some of these in Zechariah. But as a whole, Israel was left to her fate, and there was sort of this time of transition. I feel like I've beat this drum a lot when we covered Zechariah, but sort of the beginning of the Messianic age. It was this time of transition between the old covenant and the new covenant. So the promise that those who were not God's people would become sons of the living God, it wasn't exactly a one-to-one reversal of verse 9, which is talking about, okay, I had this covenant with you, and y'all have broken it time and time and time again, and now you will not be my people, I will not be your God, and I'm going to give you up to the fate of Assyria. It's not a one-to-one reversal of that. But it did happen. There were promises given to the remnant, and it did happen through, like we said, the North as well, and also the Gentiles who were previously, right, not God's people, would become known as children of the living God. And we see this specifically in the Messianic age. And that was actually your fill in the blank. The Gentiles who were previously not God's people would be called children of the living God. Hosea is intentionally using the same wording here, but in a different way, right? Verse 9, it is talking about ethnic Israel and the fact that they have broken the covenant time and time again. Now, it's talking about, but even in spite of this, there is still hope. But this hope, it's going to come. You're not going to just completely rise up from the ashes on your own. You're going to do it with the people who were not God's people, and they're going to be called children of the living God. And then getting to verse 11, you're going to do it with Judah as well. So, third promise that really sticks out here is it says, then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together and appoint for themselves one head. So there's a couple interesting callbacks here. First, when it says that they will appoint a new leader or appoint for themselves one head, this is a callback to when Israel wanted a king in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 4 and 5. And that was your blank. So 1 Samuel chapter 8, it says, all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. Verse 5, they said to him, you are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. And the two words in Hosea chapter 1, verse 11, appoint for themselves one head. And then 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 5, appoint a king to lead us. It's the same root word. It's different forms of the same root word. And so, this is, the people are the ones who are going to be making this request, right? They're going to want this to happen. Second callback is calling us back to before there were kings in Judah, or Israel, I guess, either one. Before there were kings in Israel, there were judges. And so this is specifically the word appoint for themselves one head or one leader, which is how the NIV translates it. Judges chapter 11. This is kind of a long section of scripture, but it says, sometime later, when the Ammonites were fighting against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. Come, they said, be our commander so we can fight the Ammonites. And he said to them, didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when we're in trouble? The elders of Gilead said to him, nevertheless, we are turning to you now. Come with us, fight the Ammonites, and you will be head over us who live in Gilead. I hope you picked up on that. Jephthah answered, he said, suppose you take me back to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them to me. Will I really be your head? The elders of Gilead replied, the Lord is our witness, we will certainly do as you say. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them, and he repeated all of his words before the Lord in Mizpah. So, same word, right? Head or ruler is what's being used here in Hosea. I mean, this is, got to remember, I mean, there's still kings in Hosea's time. So, I mean, this probably would have caught some people, right? I mean, you're listening to Hosea give this, and he doesn't say they're going to appoint themselves a king, he doesn't say that, but it's the same sort of wording from the time of the judges. So what are sort of the implications of this, of these two callbacks? Well, like we said, the new ruler is going to be chosen. He's going to be wanted by the people. However, right, it's not going to be a king in the traditional sense. He's going to be a head. He's going to be a ruler. But, right, this line of kings, I stab you in the back, I take your place. 6 months later, someone stabs me in the back, they take my place. The promise is basically that's going to be done away with. I don't know, how well you remember your Roman history class, but there was a time where it literally was like every month, right? The Caesars and all of that. I mean, they were like stabbing each other in the back. I'm Caesar now. A month later, I'm stabbing you in the back. I'm Caesar now. And it just all the time, constantly shifting leaders. And that's kind of how it was at a point in Israel's history. There was a lot of turnover and a lot of assassinations. And it says no more, right? This is going to be a king that is, well, it's not going to be a king. It's going to be a ruler. This is going to be a ruler who is wanted by the people. The people are going to appoint him. And like we said, I mean, this was an incredibly relevant promise given to Israel, considering, not only you have people that are king and they kind of take it by force, but oftentimes those same people, I mean, they were pretty cruel. They weren't exactly the kind of people you would want reigning over you. This wasn't like, oh, well, you took the castle by force, but, at least you cut my taxes in half. No, this is, these are not the people you want ruling over you by any means. And so the promise in Hosea is that this new ruler, it's not going to be like any of the rulers currently, and it's not going to be like anything that came before. Fourth and final sort of promise that really sticks out is it says, they shall come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. So, right, we've seen how a lot of stuff here is a call back to either something else in Hosea chapter 1 or just something else in the Old Testament. And this is no different. A lot of people have pointed out that this is resurrection language, right? And, this always really confused me as a kid. So surely I'm not the only one that got confused by this, but there's like the general doctrine or like idea of resurrection, but like I only ever hear that applied to Jesus's resurrection. It's like when I was a kid, this is kind of a side note. When I was a kid, there's like oh, well, there's this group in the New Testament called the Sadducees, and they don't believe in the resurrection. And so I just thought that meant they didn't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. But what that meant is they don't believe in a bodily resurrection for anyone at all. But yeah, so this is resurrection language, not specifically talking about the resurrection of Jesus, but the resurrection of the human body in general. That was not in my notes, and that was not scripted. But I thought, well, if I was confused by that as a kid, surely someone else was confused by that at one point. The idea of the resurrection of the body. Ezekiel 37, verses 12, 13, and 14, God saying to Ezekiel, prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your land. Then you will know that I have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord. So Hosea promises that Israel will come up out of the land. Ezekiel promises that Israel will be brought up from their graves in verse 12 and 13. Similar to, Hosea used not my people in verse 9 differently than he used it in verse 10. In verse 9, it was ethnic Israel. Specifically in verse 10, it was both ethnic Israel and also Gentiles. Here he uses Jezreel differently. Verse 4 and 5, talking about the valley of Jezreel, sort of the line of Jehu coming to an end, all that stuff that we talked about last week. Verse 11, it says, great will be the day of Jezreel. And people pointed out Jezreel is a symbol for Israel as a whole. So this is a quote. It says, Israel has been cast off, is no longer God's covenant people, and eventually, along with Judah, will be destroyed as an independent people. For them to make such a comeback, as is seen in these verses, requires a reversal of a great magnitude. And what more appropriate words to use for this reversal than words which can imply resurrection along with a return from exile? So you have, like I say, great will be the day of Jezreel, right? Great will be the day of Israel. You're going to be as numerous as the sand of the sea. You're going to have these people that weren't God's people who are now sons of the living God. Judah and Israel coming together. They're going to appoint for themselves one leader who's not like anything that has happened before. And there's this resurrection language. They're going to come up out of the land. And ultimately, right, this culminates in the Messianic age, which is our final bullet point for this evening, right? We're not dealing with the promise to bring Israel back to its heyday, right? Just like every other minor prophet that's sort of dealing with the subject, there is a very definitive end. Not every prophet specifically deals with this concept, but the other minor prophets that get into this, they're always clear that, judgment is coming and it's going to be bad and there's not really anything you can do about it. And then they'll throw in the promises, but that doesn't negate the fact that judgment is also coming, right? Judgment has to be poured out. Just because I say, just because, if I have a kid and I say, okay, well, I'm going to, ground you for a week. And then after that, you can, go out again. That doesn't negate the fact that you still have to suffer for a week before you can have fun again. And it's the same way in the minor prophets. But there is always this sort of definitiveness to the end, right? Like I said, the sort of overlap of or this time of transition between the old covenant and the new covenant, right? Zechariah chapter 11, when Zechariah is, pretending to be a shepherd and he has the two staffs, he says, "Then I took my staff called favor and broke it, revoking the covenant I had made with all the nations," right? So this, we talk about this sort of protective covenant of, okay, these other nations, they aren't going to be able to totally overcome Israel. That was broken. And as we know, Israel, Judah, they were taken over. They were conquered. The people were exiled. Everything was destroyed. But there were still promises given to the remnant, right? On a nationwide or on an institutional level, the covenant was sort of broken. But at the same time, on a smaller scale, a lot of the covenantal promises were still promised to the remnant. And so in this, these promises in Hosea, these, there's not this sort of wide scale fulfillment of reunification, right? Like we said, there has not been a, united monarchy of Israel and Judah like there was pre-exile. There's not been one since. Thinking to sort of the return language, you have language here that sounds like return from exile. But even that, return from exile was not, for specifically the North anyway, it was not this wide scale event, right? A lot of people, they just settled down, or if they did leave, they went somewhere else. So we're not necessarily dealing with this sort of wide scale fulfillment like you would necessarily think. But what we're dealing with is found in the Messianic age. Once again, like we saw in Zechariah. Israel becoming as numerous as the sand of the sea. This is only possible through the Gentiles. That is, I think this is your blank. The Gentiles. This is only possible through the Gentiles who previously were not God's people and become like sons of the living God. And this only happened, the one leader who was chosen by the people and who was unlike the kings of Hosea's time or any who came before, right? This only happened with Jesus Christ. That's another one of your blanks. Continuing, he was the only one who was able to bring the people out of the land or out of the grave, right? And in the Messianic and now the church age, mercy is shown. And everyone can be my or God's people, right? Basically putting all this together, you see all of this fulfilled directly in the Messianic age, right? How is Israel as numerous as the sand in the sea or the stars in the sky? Like Paul talks about, right? What matters isn't just the fact that you can trace your lineage back to Abraham, but what matters is faith. And like Paul says, Israel now is Jew and Gentile, as Paul puts it, many of whom are Gentiles. So, the children of Israel truly are innumerable, right? There are, I don't know. I don't want to say some number and be wrong. Millions and millions of Christians all across the world, who, right, Jew, Gentile, every race, every country, who are brought in under this new covenant. You have, right, and that is also the fulfillment of the second part, right? Those people who, it was said to them, "You are not my people." They are called sons of the living God, right? In the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, right, God did not reveal himself directly to the Gentiles, right? Doesn't mean every Gentile was just some out of luck. But, God specifically worked in and through the Israelites. That's who God revealed himself to. But now, through the revelation of Jesus Christ and through the message of the gospel going out to the nations, God has revealed himself to everyone, Jew, Gentile, Jews and Arabs and Americans and English people, and right, any country or ethnicity that you can think of, right? And so the children of Judah, the children of Israel being brought together and appointing for themselves one head, right? Well, Jesus Christ is head over the church. And like we said, the church is comprised of Jew, Gentile, everyone, right? They shall appoint for themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, and great will be the day of Jezreel, right? We're living in the days of Jezreel. You've probably never once thought about that in your life, but go to bed tonight and think about that, because that's kind of cool, right? All of this is sort of fulfilled in the Messianic era and the church age as well. But postscript, the language here, and this is very intentional, and this is what you gotta love about Hosea, it can also be read in an exilic sense, right? Like we talked about. That quote that I read earlier, it said, what more appropriate words to use for this reversal than words which can be construed to imply resurrection along with return from exile? And this is very intentional, right? Because as I always talk about, right, prophecy is relevant to the time in which it's given. And so, the people, hearing this, they're not in exile now, but the Assyrian crisis was already kind of a thing and was becoming a problem. And a lot of people kind of saw, the writing on the wall. And it wouldn't be terribly long after this that they actually would be exiled and carted off. And so, the language here can be read in an exilic sense, and the reversal of this covenant breaking that had occurred in Hosea's time, and the exile that was soon to come. It can also be read from these verses. You can read it that way. The promises that are given, they speak directly to Israel's current situation, right? One scholar, he sort of points out, you have Israel, who at this time, they were facing a declining population due to war. So, pretend like you're listening to Hosea give this way back when. And you were in a small Israelite town of 10,000 people, and now you're down to 5. You hear this guy come and say, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea. That's gonna get your attention, right? They were suffering declining population due to war. They were suffering national division, right? In Hosea's time, we're well past the splitting point of when there were two kingdoms. So you have national division, and now you hear, but the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and there will be one head over them, right? That's going to catch your attention. They were suffering from divided and unstable monarchies. Again, the one head over them, it's not a king, it's not a monarchy, it's a leader, it's a ruler. It's similar to the judges of before. They were also, like I said, suffering the impending Assyrian exile. Obviously they weren't completely prepared for it, and I'm sure it caught a lot of people off guard. But we know, a lot of people, not only Israel, but just a lot of these other countries, when Assyria started to rise, they saw the writing on the wall and they knew, we're probably going to get beat by these guys. Because Assyria, just in terms of number of people, not even military, just overall population, dwarfed Israel. So maybe it was surprising, but also for a lot of people, it wasn't surprising at all. Also, they were suffering spiritual deadness, covenantal deadness. And so to hear not only, the number is going to be as much as the sand, and the people who are not my people are going to be called children of the living God. But to hear, right, they shall come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Say to your brethren, my people, and to your sisters, mercy is shown. To know that, okay, well, there's going to be mercy. There's going to be compassion from God. We're going to be God's people again. That's an incredibly relevant message for Hosea's people. Even if the final fulfillment of this came with Jesus Christ, there are elements of this that can be read in a Assyrian conquest or Assyrian exile sense, and senses of this in which it speaks directly to what was going on in Israel during the days of Hosea. So anyway, that's all I got. It was shorter than usual, but I think it was nice, because if we tried to cover chapter 2, we would be here forever. So any questions or anything anyone wants to
request?
Yes.
Would you go over all those blanks on this?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So first thing, the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea. This promise calls us back to God's covenant with Abraham. Number 2, you are the sons of the living God. The Gentiles, who were previously called not my people, would become known as children of the living God. Hosea is intentionally using the same wording, but in a different way.
This is but not in a different way on this paper.
Just scratch out the not. I don't know.
Well, I changed that to put it, but in a similar way. Would that not be right?
But not in a similar way. Yeah.
I just changed it because the not was in there.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, I really need a secretary to proof this. Spell. You have spell check, which will some of the time tell you if you misspell something. I need an entire grammar check to make sure that I don't have subject and verb disagreements or something. Anyway, number 3, appoint for themselves one head. This is a callback to when Israel wanted a king in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 4 and 5. The second callback in this verse is a callback to times prior to the institution of the monarchy, with the word head or the word leader from Judges chapter 11, verse 8. They shall come up out of the land. Various commentators have noted the resurrection language in verse 11 of chapter 1. And we get this from Ezekiel 37, verses 12 through 14, which is what is the parentheses. And then finally, the Messianic age. This was sort of the one where it was all just one paragraph with blanks. The Gentiles, blank number 1, who previously were not God's people, became sons of the living God. Further, the one leader who was chosen by the people and is unlike the kings of Hosea's time only happened with Jesus Christ, blank number 2. He was the only one able to bring people out of the land or out of the grave, blank number 3. And in the Messianic and now the church age, mercy is shown, and everyone can be my or God's people, verse 1 of chapter 2.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Merci beaucoup.
I wish we had like a screen, and I could just do PowerPoint, and anytime there was a blank, I just hit the next slide and it would just appear on the screen behind me. But oh well. I'm not that technologically.
You're technologically challenged.
Yeah, I'm technologically illiterate. Okay.